Welcome back to Educator.com. Today we're going to look at the final market structure, which is monopolistic competition. So today's lesson, we're going to discuss characteristics of monopolistic competition. We're going to graph monopolistically competitive firms making profit, incurring loss in the short run. And we're also going to graph monopolistically competitive firms in the long run with zero economic profit. So there's going to be three different graphs we're going to look and examine in terms of monopolistically competitive firms. And then we're going to compare and contrast monopolistically competitive firms with perfectly competitive firms. So we're going to compare and contrast scenarios with perfect competition versus monopolistic competition. And finally, we're going to explore ways in which monopolistically competitive firms differentiate their product. So let's go over some characteristics of monopolistic competition. What separates a monopolistically competitive firm from perfect competition, monopoly, or oligopoly? Well, the first thing is that there's a large number of competing firms. So most firms are going to compete in monopolistically competitive situations there. So for example, vendors in big food courts, in a big food court at the mall. You can make different choices. You can have Chinese food, you can have Mexican food, Korean food. There's going to be maybe 15 to 20 different restaurants, all producing food, but a variety of food at a variety of prices. Or it could be like gas stations along a major highway. You can go to Unical, you can go to Shell, you can go to Chevron. They're all very similar, but not identical. So there's going to be a large number of competing firms, competing for your dollars, basically. The second characteristic of a monopolistically competitive market would be you have differentiated products. So you're not selling the exact same thing. So it's a similar but not identical products. So for example, there are various types of chocolate candy. You have Twix, Snickers, M&M's, 100 Grand, or Kit Kat. There's similar but not identical genes. There's similar but not identical economics textbooks. So there's tons of different products out there that sell something, but there's different ways of producing the same or similar type of product here. So that's one characteristic of monopolistically competitive markets. Chances are you have participated in a monopolistically competitive market if you've woken up and done pretty much anything today, because the majority of our goods participate in monopolistic competition. And the third characteristic of monopolistic competition would be free entry and exit in the long run. Basically, this is saying that if there's profit, firms are going to come in, and if there's loss, they leave here. So if there are opportunities for profit, firms can enter. Similarly, if there is loss, companies will exit. So unlike perfect competition, there's pricing power. So if you're monopolistically competitive, you can actually control some price. And unlike a monopoly, there is competition. You're not the only one. So even though you have pricing control, you're subject to competition, unlike in a monopoly. And unlike an oligopoly, there are many firms. So once again, the monopolistically competitive market is going to be similar to certain aspects of monopoly, but different in a lot of regards. Similar to some aspects of oligopoly and perfect competition, but different in other regards. So let's take a look at a graph of how a profitable firm in the short run for monopolistic competition would look like. So we're going to graph similar. The graph is going to be similar to monopoly, earning economic profit. The only difference really in terms of how you draw the graph is that the demand curve is slightly more elastic in monopolistic competition than in monopoly. So for monopoly, drawing a perfectly competitive, or in a monopoly or perfect competition, graphing is absolutely essential. And it's definitely good to know how to draw a graph for monopolistic competition. However, the one caveat to this is that there has not been consistently on the AP FRQ questions relating to specifically to draw a monopolistically competitive firm. The closest to my mind is the 2004 AP exam, in which students were required to draw a monopolistically competitive firm. To date, there hasn't been a question in regards to drawing monopolistically competitive. That being said, maybe because it hasn't been tested quite so often, maybe it's a good thing to actually study that. Now, the reason why it hasn't been tested is that a monopolistically competitive firm, the graph is going to look very similar to monopoly graph. In fact, the only really difference is that the demand curve might be slightly more elastic. So a monopoly's demand curve might look something like this here. And actually, if you draw it like that, you're probably not going to encounter any problems. AP graders are not going to ding you for having a more steep demand curve. The demand curve will be slightly more elastic. Again, hardly even noticeable, and again, not something that is going to make or break you on the exam here. And you still draw the marginal revenue curve below the demand curve. And I still recommend you you intersect the y-axis and label that MR equals 0. It's just a good force of habit to have here. And the marginal cost still looks like the Nike sign, so nothing changes here. Marginal cost. And basically, you have a profit maximizing quantity, Q star, and you have the profit maximizing price, P star here. So where's the profitability here? Well, you want to put the ATC in between the demand curve here and the marginal revenue curve here. So the ATC is still going to follow the same rules. The ATC and MC intersect at the minimum point of the ATC. Okay, so this is the ATC here. So a monopoly in the short run making a profit is going to be below the price but above the ATC here. So right here is going to represent economic profit. Now again, this is, you could draw basically the same exact graph for a monopoly in long run equilibrium earning economic profit. Now again, in the long run, this cannot happen because in the long run for a monopolistically competitive firm, all the profit is driven out. But for all intents and purposes of drawing the graph, there really is no difference between a monopoly making profit and a monopolistically competitive firm making profit. It's the same graph. Now, what is an unprofitable firm in monopolistic competition going to look like? Again, it's not going to look any different than a firm in a monopoly incurring an economic loss as well. So here's the demand curve. Again, it's going to be a little bit more elastic than would be in a monopoly graph. And the marginal revenue curve. Again, doesn't hurt to put MR equals 0 at that point. And this is the marginal revenue. Just do it. Just do it. Marginal cost. The profit maximizing quantity is Q star. The profit maximizing price would be P star. And here, again, the ATC, you're gonna intersect the marginal cost and the ATC at the minimum point of the ATC. And it's gonna be to the right of the demand curve here. So the way I would draw the ATC here is to the right of the demand curve, and I would draw a happy face, the ATC right here. And above the demand curve, but below the ATC, is going to be the economic loss. And you're going to be in the red here. So this would be referred to as the econ loss or economic loss. Now you could label it profit, but it's going to be a negative profit. So again, to go over this here, the graph is similar to a monopoly incurring economic loss. And again, demand curve is slightly more elastic in monopolistic competition than in monopoly. But basically you have identical graphs right here. You have a monopolistically competitive firm with some pricing power, and it's going to incur a loss. And that's basically what's going on. Now, it is not in long run equilibrium in this particular case, simply because in the long run, there is no economic profit for monopolistically competitive firms. So what firms are going to do, they're going to exit the industry. They're going to exit the industry, and that's going to drive firms away. It's going to drive away the losses, and there's going to be basically an equilibrium of no profit in the long run. And so this is the situation that's going to happen. You're going to have the long run zero profit equilibrium here. So if profitable, what the firm does here, firm entry will occur and individual firm demand will shift to the left. And that makes sense. So firms are gonna enter, and what that's gonna do is gonna drive out individual profitability for individual firms. Now, in the other situation here, if unprofitable, firms will exit, exits will occur, and individual firm demand will shift to the right. So yes, it's unprofitable for firms exit, but those that stay in business, they're going to become slightly more profitable, and that's a good thing for individual firms. If your competition goes away, this is good for your business here. Now, in the long run, the demand curve will be tangent to its ATC at its profit maximizing point. So basically, you have the same graph as a monopoly not making any economic profit, except this is now a long run equilibrium for a monopolistically competitive firm. So this is how it would look like. So you draw the demand curve here, Q and P. Make sure you label the price and quantity here. And you want to draw the marginal revenue below the demand curve, label it MR. And where it intersects the x-axis, once again, MR equals 0. Never hurts to put that in there. Just do it. That's the marginal cost. The profit maximizing quantity here is Q star and P star. Now, the ATC here, you're going to have to make it a point to understand what's going on here. You're going to put it to the right of the demand curve. So start right here, somewhere below this point, but above the point of allocative efficiency where marginal cost and the price intersect here. So somewhere in between here. And you want to draw the ATC again. The ATC and the MC intersect at the minimum point of the ATC here. And when you draw the graph to the left, have it be tangent here to the profit maximizing quantity here. And so this is the profit maximizing point here. And basically there is no economic profit. Now, is this allocatively efficient? No. So it's not allocatively efficient because you are producing to the left of the productive efficiency and allocative efficiency here. So if a monopolistically competitive firm wanted to be allocatively efficient, it would actually produce more. But again, people like variety, and it's not necessarily about minimizing costs. People don't want to eat the same burger. They want McDonald's, they want Wendy's, they want Burger King, they want In-N-Out. That's what it's all about. So you want to have different, similar but not identical. And so people are willing to pay a premium, even though the cost would actually go down if people were consuming the exact same item. But that's just not what people want. So let's compare perfect versus monopolistic competition. How that actually would look like here. What are some commonalities here? Well, both make zero economic profit. So that's something that is very similar. There's no economic profit to be made. So there is accounting profit, but there is no profit beyond the opportunity cost. In perfect competition, they operate at both minimum ATC and where P equals MC. So you can say that both are productively and allocatively efficient. Okay, that is not the case in monopolistic competition. In monopolistic competition, they operate to the left of the minimum cost output and therefore has excess capacity. And therefore, it is neither allocatively efficient nor is it productively efficient. So how does that actually look side by side? It does help to review drawing the perfect competition graphs and monopolistically competitive graphs. I definitely do recommend when you go to a restaurant and you're waiting for an order, have a pen ready, and on your napkins, draw a monopoly graph, a perfect competition graph, and a monopolistic competition graph. It definitely is helpful to get repetition as you prepare for the AP exam. So here's how a perfectly competitive firm will look like here. Remember, it's going to be a straight horizontal line here. This is going to be Mr. Pard. So MR equals P equals AR equals D. And what you're going to have here is the marginal cost, the MC, is going to all intersect at this point here, the ATC here. So you're going to smile right here. So this is ATC here. So right here, not only is it the profit maximizing quantity, you're at the minimum of the ATC and MC, and the price equals the marginal, the price equals the demand here at the marginal cost. So this point is allocatively efficient. It is also productively efficient because that's where it's a minimum of the ATC. And it's also profit maximizing. So why is a perfectly competitive firm producing at the productively and allocatively efficient? Well, it's almost coincidence. They're not producing because it's allocatively or productively efficient. They're really producing because it's also the profit maximizing point. That's where the marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Now it just happens that that's what's also best for society. But again, individuals, firms, they're going to do what's in their best interest, and that's just basically how the world works. Now, how does a monopolistically competitive firm actually look like in comparison to this? Well, let's go ahead and draw this demand curve here, label it demand right here. This is a quantity, and this is a price. And here's the marginal revenue curve. Again, MR equals 0. Make it very robotic. Just do it. Marginal cost. And this is a profit maximizing quantity, Q star here. And this is going to be P star here. So notice the price is going to be higher in monopolistic competition than in perfect competition. Again, the trade-off being that you get more variety. And you draw the ATC tangent to the point at which it's the profit maximizing here. So notice, in monopolistic competition, they're going to operate at this point right here, to the left of minimum cost output. Now, what is minimum cost output here? So right here, let's label this as QP. So, or this is productively efficient. Now, what's allocatively efficient? So right here is or the marginal cost equals the price here. So here, let's label it as QS. So this here is allocatively efficient. So what you have here is that a monopolistically competitive firm is producing less than socially efficient or allocatively efficient, and it's definitely not productively efficient. It has excess capacity. So you can make an argument one way that a perfectly competitive market is superior to a monopolistically competitive market because monopolistically competitive firms will just waste resources. That's one way to look at it. However, if you ask most people enjoy having variety around. They don't want one particular brand of anything. There is a role of product differentiation and advertising. Now, how can firms differentiate their products? 3 different ways. They can differentiate by style or type. And again, each firm is going to do whatever they can to try to gain market share. For example, in the 1970s, when the airlines faced regulations in terms of price floors, all flights basically were charging higher than the equilibrium. So the way that they differentiated themselves was by style and type. And so airlines would try to get their customers to do different things or to fly on their airlines by making their product better than other products. Also, differentiation by location. So even gas stations are selling similar but identical products, but even 2 gas stations might charge different prices, and they're right across the street from each other, well, one consumer may have to make a U-turn in order to get into that gas station, and that's a differentiated product right there. So not only is Unocal and Chevron different by the style and the type of consumer and branding that they're going after, but they're located differently as well, different places here. And also differentiation by quality. And people just prefer to have options in terms of either paying a premium for a very expensive, for example, MacBook Pro, versus paying very little for a netbook. It depends on the quality that a consumer is wanting to purchase here. Very few people want just the standard laptop. So to kind of show you how it was actually important, and it's, at least in American consumer culture, product differentiation is absolutely important. For example, let's take a look at Ford versus General Motors. A very famous quote that can be attributed to Henry Ford. He very famously quipped that customers could get the Model T in any color so long as it was black. So basically, you had kind of a perfectly competitive market, and Henry Ford basically assumed that lower costs are the premium thing that American consumers wanted. And while the Model T was definitely an innovative product, and prices went down so much that the average American household could afford a car, in the 20th century, the Ford actually was not the dominant car. It was GM. And the reason why is that Alfred Sloan, he basically challenged this perfectly competitive view of automobiles. And so even though more expensive, consumers preferred the range of styles, and GM, not Ford, became the dominant car brand during the 20th century. So basically what Henry Ford thought might be better suited as being perfectly competitive actually was monopolistically competitive. And so if he had the foresight, then he might have expanded the Model T line to something more than black a little bit earlier on. So here's a monopolistic competition example here. So assume a city eliminates the license fee. So the fixed cost for all firms in a monopolistically competitive industry, and let's say it's in long-run equilibrium, it's gone. So no more fixed costs. So it's gone. So how is output affected, and how is economic profit affected? So again, let's go ahead and draw this monopolistically competitive firm in long-run equilibrium. It's going to look very similar to a monopoly making no economic profit. So again, once again, you draw the demand curve here, and you draw the marginal revenue below the demand curve, and just do it. The marginal cost curve, and the profit maximizing point here is where marginal cost equals the marginal revenue. And again, I'm going to put MR equals 0 here. That is a revenue maximizing point here. And here's P star here. And so that is the profit maximizing quantity here. Now, where's the ATC going to be here? If it's in long run equilibrium here, again, choose a point below the profit maximizing price, but above the point of allocative efficiency here. And you draw the ATC where it's tangent to the profit maximizing point here. And basically, you have you have a monopolistically competitive firm in long-run equilibrium. So this is all the points of the graph. Everything's labeled here. Now, the one exogenous event that occurs is that the city eliminates the license fee. So there is no more license fee. So the fixed cost actually decreases. Now, that doesn't impact the marginal. So how is output affected? And the answer is absolutely not. It's not affected. So not affected. Not affected. No change. And why? If you had an explain here, then it's no change because marginal cost stays the same. If the fixed cost is changing, then the variable cost the variable cost stays exactly the same. And so when the fixed cost is reduced, it has no impact on the marginality of a decision. Now, how is economic profit affected? Economic profit is affected, well, if fixed cost goes down, then total cost goes down. And if total cost goes down, well, guess what? ATC also goes down here. So let's go ahead and graph how it actually look like. So the ATC actually would go down. It would go down maybe like this. ATC2 right here. And basically a long run, what would happen is that in the short run, what would end up happening is that there would be economic profit as labeled right here. So this would be the economic profit. Why is this the case? Because it's below the price but above the ATC. So in the short run, a monopolistically competitive firm can make economic profit. Now again, this is not a long run situation. The economic profit, what is it going to do? So firms enter and basically demand increases, and basically it drives out the profit. How does it drive out the profit? Well, individual firms make less. Individual firms make less. So basically, this entire green shaded area is driven out by the increase in the number of firms until it reaches back to the long run equilibrium of zero economic profit. Thank you for watching Educator.com.